If you are working on a book and hoping to eventually publish it, you may be wondering what genres are publishers actually looking for. And rather than talking about any specific genres that are trending right now, I'm going to give you today the top 3 popular genres that traditional publishers are still looking for and are still publishing. These are 3 genres that have a very established presence in the traditional publishing industry, so if you are writing in one of these 3 genres, you definitely have a chance of success with publishing that book. Now, before we dive in, I do want to say that this is absolutely not an exhaustive list. Obviously, there are way more genres than just these 3. And if your book does not fall into one of these genres, that is completely fine, and it does not necessarily mean you won't be able to get traditionally published. The information in this video is just coming from my personal experience having worked at 2 of the big 5 US trade publishing houses. Now, if this type of content is helpful for you and you're interested in book writing and learning more about trends in the traditional publishing industry, subscribe to my channel. I provide a lot of content for writers, especially those who are looking to get traditionally published by a major publishing house. So with that, let's dive into the first genre that traditional publishers are still looking for, and that is psychological thrillers, one of my absolute favorite genres and one of the genres I specialize in as an editor. With hits like Gone Girl and Girl on the Train, which not only were internationally best-selling books, but were also adapted into really popular films, this genre really has become a mainstay in the publishing industry, and the popularity has not dwindled. Now, when we're talking about psychological thrillers, these are suspenseful stories where a lot of the thrill and excitement is actually about what's going on inside the characters' brains. It's less focused on external action. These characters may not be who they initially seem to be or who they initially present to be, and unraveling the nuances and the mysteries inside those personalities is part of the excitement in reading a psychological thriller. So if you are writing a psychological thriller, how do you make yours stand out and how do you make it appealing to a traditional publisher? I have 3 tips for this. The first is to make sure that your psychological thriller has a unique twist. Unfortunately, as more and more books in this genre are getting published, that means there are fewer and fewer ways to make your twist stand out because more people are doing different types of twists in those books that are getting published. So one that really was super original and creative when it first arose in the genre is the twist of the unreliable narrator. So potentially we're reading halfway through and then realize that the narrator is not who they appear to be, is not who they have presented themselves to be to us. Perhaps that narrator is actually the person who we've been looking for all along, such as if we're looking for the person who perpetrated a crime and then we realize it's actually the narrator who did so. If you have a twist like this in your current manuscript draft, it doesn't mean that you need to throw it out and start all over and figure out a new twist. It's just something to keep in mind to make sure that you're really contributing a new element to the genre and you aren't just repeating tropes that have already been done many times over. Now, the second way to make your psychological thriller stand out is to have really creative characters or a really unique setting. So one book that comes to mind is Tangerine by Christine Mangan. This is a really great psychological thriller that is set in Tangier, a place that a lot of people don't have a lot of experience with, or maybe a place that they have wanted to visit and they want to learn more about. So immediately setting the story in that place makes it exciting to a publisher because it's something they haven't seen before. And the last way to make a psychological thriller stand out in the genre is to have a unique, compelling structure. So one example could be potentially switching back and forth between different character point of views. That's something that has been done many times, but still proves to be an effective way to structure a psychological thriller, especially because you're learning different things about the different characters when you're in their point of view. But also think about kind of out-of-the-box structures. So one novel that I love dearly is Fierce Kingdom by Gin Phillips. And this novel really only takes place over the course of a few hours. And so each chapter heading or section heading is really like a countdown, like, 1 hour in, another hour in, and it's really marking the time at that minuscule level, which really ups the suspense and the sense of urgency. So think about if there is a creative way for you to play with the structure of your psychological thriller to make it stand out in the genre. Now let's talk about the second popular genre that publishers are still looking for today. This is historical fiction. Historical fiction is always going to be a mainstay in the publishing industry because people love to be transported into different times. And you may have noticed that World War II fiction, while it feels like maybe something that's been done many times, is still popular. So if you are writing a historical fiction novel set in World War II, yes, there's going to be a lot of titles out there that are also set there, but it's popular for a reason. People want it. People are compelled by that time period, and they are interested in stories that take place there. Historical fiction also works really well for series authors like Martha Hall Kelly, who has written now a trilogy of novels where it follows interconnected storylines between different generations of a family. So if you are interested in really immersing yourself in a series, historical fiction is a great place to do so because readers seem to really like to stick with a certain writer, stick with a certain time period, or stick with a certain family and follow them through book by book, story by story. So if you're writing a piece of historical fiction, how can you make sure yours stands out? The first bit of advice I have is to try and have your novel shed light on a little known event or a little known fact in our history. This could be something that maybe never made it into textbooks, but you have uncovered it through some type of primary research, or maybe you have some type of ancestral family background that actually makes for a really compelling and interesting story that most people just don't know about. Another way to make your historical fiction novel stand out is to tell it from the perspective of a character that we really don't see often. You know, there's a saying, history is written by the winners. So who are the losers in the case of the time period that you're writing in? And maybe integrate their point of view and really show us how they experience the time. And then lastly, with any piece of historical fiction, you need to ensure you are doing meticulous research so that you are conveying the time period accurately. There are going to be readers who really understand it and know all the ins and outs of that time period, and they really want to make sure that you are actually portraying it authentically. So that's a key element that will not only make your historical fiction novel stand out, but actually make it really successful whenever it is published. The third genre that is still super popular among publishers is contemporary women's fiction. Now, I don't love the term women's fiction, but it is still used really widely in the industry to describe novels that are really primarily from a female point of view, or maybe the protagonist is a woman and the intended readership is also primarily women. And there is historical women's fiction as well, which would obviously fall under the historical fiction category, but contemporary women's fiction is another genre that is still very popular. These books usually center around a journey of a female character and show her personal development over a given time. Maybe she is presented with some kind of challenge and then she grows in various ways over the course of the events of the plot. Contemporary women's fiction can either be more serious or dramatic in tone, or even more lighthearted and fun. So it really ranges that whole spectrum of tone. And many works of contemporary women's fiction have what we call book club appeal, which means that they are really ripe for discussion. They cover themes that people want to talk about and people want to sit down and discuss the different elements of the story to really enrich their experience of it. So if you're writing a piece of contemporary women's fiction, what can you do to make sure it stands out in the market? The first thing you need to ensure that your piece has is a strong voice. Because this genre is so character driven, it is really important that the reader immediately connects to that voice and really wants to be a part of that protagonist's journey. Secondly, you need to ensure you have authentic and resonant themes that readers actually feel like they can relate to. Perhaps your novel centers around themes about family, or about relationships or marriage, or about maybe loss or grief. Maybe it's even about growing older. All of these themes are things that are just a part of the human condition and the human experience, and they're the types of things that will go back to those book club discussions and really make for a rich, engaging conversation. A writer who does this really well and weaves in these resonant themes into a really well-told, compelling story is J. Courtney Sullivan. The last element you should consider to make your piece of contemporary women's fiction stand out is to make sure it is swift and readable. So people also call these beach reads for a reason. They want to be able to relax on the beach and kind of turn the pages and enjoy it in one sitting. Just like really consume the whole thing at once. You don't literally have to make sure that, you know, your book can be read in one sitting. You shouldn't necessarily like cut it down for that reason, but it should feel swift. It should feel like there's a lot of momentum and that it's easy to read, so that readers can really immerse themselves in it and get that experience. So I suspect that there might be some genres that you're surprised I didn't talk about or you wish that I went into. Obviously, I wasn't able to cover every single genre in this video, but I did want to give you some of the heavy hitters that in my experience at publishing houses, I saw most editors responding to. That said, of course, there are many, many other genres that you may be writing in, and those can be just as commercially successful as these three. It's also worth mentioning that if your novel doesn't fit squarely into a predetermined genre, or maybe if it has elements of multiple genres and is kind of a hybrid, that is not necessarily a bad thing. So don't feel like you need to put your novel into one genre on its own. I actually have a video that goes into the different types of fiction genres that may be helpful if you are in that process of trying to figure out what genre yours fits in or what genres it fits in. But publishers and literary agents are always looking for the next trend in the industry. So it can definitely be a positive thing if yours doesn't necessarily fit the predetermined molds. I hope this gave you some insight into what publishers are looking for and what genres will continue to resonate with readers through the next years to come. If you have any questions at all about the traditional publishing process, drop me a comment below and also let me know what type of project you're working on and if it fits into one of these genres or something else entirely. If you found this video helpful, hit that like button and subscribe to my channel if you have any interest in publishing, writing, books, fiction. I talk about all of that stuff every single week and would love to have you around. Thanks so much for watching and happy writing.